And as you might expect, also very important in the midst of all this is the importance of family, or filial piety, right? Family duty, particularly with respect to the ancestors. There are certain rituals that are expected to be performed towards the ancestors because of the respect that is owed them, which, like in other religions we've seen, is an important part of why you have a family line, so that the children can continue to honor the ancestors. A very important virtue within Confucianism that kind of ties into some of these other things is Ren. Ren is translated a variety of ways. Goodness is one way it's put. Benevolence is another way that it's sometimes translated. Some people translate it as human-heartedness. And so if you truly have a human heart, you're going to exhibit these qualities. Essentially, the idea behind Ren is behaving properly toward other people. And so you have to have this characteristic, a character of, rooted in your emotions, rooted in your heart. And it's by exhibiting this characteristic that you exhibit that you are truly human. If you don't have Ren, you're not living up to your humanness. Very connected to Ren is the concept of Li. Li is translated sometimes as ritual, but ritual probably isn't the best way for us to think about it in the West. Something like etiquette might be closer. And so if you can kind of find some way to meld ritual and the kind of sacredness of ritual with the rules of etiquette, that kind of gets close to what's the idea behind here. It's not just like religious ritual, but it is about social behavior. How do you behave in certain situations? So etiquette or propriety. But the only appropriate way to exhibit propriety is if you have Ren. Right? So Ren is the interior characteristic. Li is the way you express it. And so it has to do with proper manners, body language. As you think about the relationship you have with different individuals in different settings. Any questions so far? Any of these things that we need to explain more fully?
You mentioned that he didn't like the ancestors. Why is there an emphasis on it?
He didn't like the idea of the gods and some of the other spiritual things. And so he still tapped into this ancestor, respecting the ancestors. But the gods, demons, some of the other things of that aspect, that was the part that he didn't emphasize as much. Other questions? So Confucianism has ebbed and flowed in China over its long history. Sometimes it's been very popular. It's shaped a lot of Chinese experience in government. Other times it's not been popular. Other times books of Confucius' teaching have been burned. Confucius at various times has been demonized. But in some parts, it has been very important that Confucian teaching be a part of Chinese politics. And so, at some point in time, 5 classic texts associated with Confucianism were required for university study. And so, as you were educated in the upper classes, you studied these texts, and you were tested on them. All of them have been attributed to Confucius either as an editor or a compiler, but again, historically, there's a question of how accurate that is. But these books have evolved over time. The other thing, of course, that makes all of this problematic is, as I mentioned, those times when some books connected with Confucius have been burned. The one that's been the most popular outside of China and the West is the I Ching, or the Book of Changes. The reason that it's been popular has to do with its content. It's been presented as kind of a divination manual, right? That you kind of read the text and you can determine what's going to happen in the future. Other aspects of the I Ching include thinking about the two Chinese forces that we'll talk more about in Daoism of yin and yang, and thinking about how they work together and how they shape society. And so it's that aspects that have been important for Westerners. Another of the classic texts is the Book of History, which contains a variety of speeches by various royal people or governmental officials, principles of government, etc. The third of the classic texts is the Odes, or the Book of Poetry. It is actually older than Confucius, but appears to have been compiled during Confucius' time, and the tradition is that Confucius kind of edited these things, and there were some poems that he considered to be immoral that he took out. The fourth text was the classic Rites, which is a manual on etiquette. It's a collection of a variety of different writings. Includes things like what to do during a marriage ceremony, what to do during a funeral, down to things like if you're holding an archery contest, here's how you engage that. And then finally, the Spring-Autumn Annals, a chronicle of Confucius' home state, which had been very prominent around the year 722, but declined by around 481. Hence the spring part to the autumn part. So spring is an early time of great prosperity, but moral order and public order kind of decline. Confucianism becomes very important in the BC years, coming up to the change in the Western calendar, but eventually kind of falls out of favor until about the 600 CE or AD. And largely, Confucianism kind of comes back into life due to the presence of Taoism and Buddhism. One of the reasons for this resurgence of Confucianism may have been the fact that Confucians were willing to borrow elements from Buddhism and Taoism, which had become very popular among the Chinese by this point. And so they're bringing in some of those ideas, like meditation, other things related to mental disciplines, and incorporating them into Confucian teaching. It's also during this time that the Confucians, right, these descendants of Confucius, the spiritual descendants, bring in concepts about an afterlife. And much like Taoism and Buddhism, the Neo-Confucians emphasized the person being connected to the universal cosmic order. Right? And so while Confucius himself didn't really spend too much time talking about an afterlife or the gods, the Neo-Confucians really spend some time talking about that and how by living orderly in your public life, that would shape the cosmic order. Right? So this interconnectedness, this reciprocity between public physical life and universal order. Despite that, these elements that are connected with Buddhism and Taoism, the emphasis still became for the Confucians that ethics and history are the foundation for the transformation of society. Right? Following ethical rules, living according to etiquette, understanding your connection through history. All of these are kind of very important parts of what it means to live rightly in society. And it's really here, I think, in Neo-Confucianism that you can definitely point to a change into this becoming more of a religious system rather than solely philosophy. We might say Confucianism or Confucius' teachings were simply philosophy. But Neo-Confucianism developed a variety of rituals and temples devoted to Confucius. Now, there aren't any claims that Confucius is divine or that he was somehow inspired by the gods per se, but there is that idea of performing rituals that reverence Confucius and his teaching. Which was connected with, and still connected with, a variety of practices that do bring on its ritual or religious character. Confucianism in modern periods has been referred to as lijiao, or ritual religion. These included formal religious rites done by the emperor, for example, as well as religious rituals done by the family, done by society, and of course that inner disposition is very important. In the Analects, Confucius said, "What can rites do for a person lacking in the virtue of Ren?" So ritual worship, ancestor worship, all sorts of other things that we might connect with religious. You also see, connected with Confucianism throughout the Common Era or the AD period, the development of the cult of heaven. Worship of heaven, beyond, included sacrifices offered by the emperor, taking place in the Forbidden City, pictured here, an area of Beijing that if you were not part of the imperial household, you were not allowed in. And so the cult of heaven was highly regulated, but predominantly connected with the emperor. There were a variety of family rituals that also developed, some of those from traditional Chinese religion prior to Confucius, connected with things like funerals. Every being, every human being, was considered to have two souls. The upper soul became a spirit and ascended into the worlds above. The other soul, known as the animal soul, became a ghost and descended with the body to the grave. And so annually rituals were performed to relate to this animal soul. Other family rituals included the presentation of male adolescents to the ancestors to mark their transition to adulthood. Marriage would also be announced to the ancestors as well. With a lot of that was in the cult of heaven and some of these other things is the belief that heaven had a mandate, particularly when it came to governing. Rulers, emperors, were to govern virtuously. And so heaven authorized rulers to rule. If the ruler did not rule virtuously, the mandate could be revoked. And so things like earthquakes, eclipses, any type of unnatural or unusual weather was interpreted as heaven is upset with society and was withdrawing its mandate. That on-again, off-again relationship between Confucianism and China has continued even into the modern period. And so, as different imperial powers have been in charge of China, as different ruling families have been in charge of China, it's come and gone. With the Communist Revolution in the 20th century, a lot of that was rejected. a lot of the communist turn throughout the 20th century was a rejection of traditionalism and a rejection of Confucianism in that. Additionally, a lot of the communists under the leadership of Mao Zedong really rejected any sort of thing that connected with religion, and so Confucianism was lumped up with that. However, in recent years, Confucianism has made a comeback. During the later 20th century, Confucius was vilified as a slave owner and an aristocrat, and all that was raw problems with the upper classes. But in more recent years, the government, which is still communist, has attempted to connect with the traditionalism and the philosophy of Confucius to garner national pride. And so a lot of the Chinese people today are still concerned about those connections with the past, with the ancestors. And the rulers are looking at their position economically and seeing China here is an emerging global market. There's the great possibility for China to have a substantial part of Chinese domination in the global economy. And so in order to connect with the people, they have started to connect to Confucius. And so within the past 30 years or so, there have been a variety of attempts of trying to revive Confucianism, or at least Confucius thought, without the religious concepts. In 1994, the Communist Party launched an initiative to mark the 2,545th birthday of Confucius. That seems like an odd one to celebrate, but that one happened in the year 2000. The Premier of China was frequently quoting from Confucius in his public speeches. And so in more recent years, Confucius has become important, not because there's this great return to religion, but in this attempt to kind of connect the government to the people. And then also, the Chinese government in the 20th century and into the 21st century has experienced a lot of corruption. And so Confucius has also helped with trying to develop this philosophy about governing and leading virtuously. It's kind of a philosophical standing. Questions about Confucianism? Anything that we need to clarify?